At Arizona State University, we're bringing world-class education from our globally acclaimed faculty to you. Ranked #1 in innovation for 10 consecutive years and #2 among public universities for employability, ASU isn't just ahead of the curve, it's creating new paths to success. Earn your degree from the nation's most innovative university. Online, that's a degree better. Explore more than 300 undergraduate, graduate, and certificate programs at asuonline.asu.edu.
Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're diving into something pretty crazy. Trying to figure out how Donald Trump managed to win a second term as president in 2024.
It's wild, right? You don't really see that very often, especially after a first term like his.
So we've got excerpts from pasted text, which goes into a ton of detail about the entire campaign. And we're going to try to understand why America decided to bring Trump back.
You know, to really understand it, I think we have to go back to the beginning. Before the campaign even started, what was the mood of the country like?
Yeah, good point. What was going on in America leading up to 2024?
Okay, picture this. It's post-pandemic America. The country's still kind of reeling from everything, you know? Economically, socially, politically. Families are dealing with crazy inflation. Housing costs are through the roof.
Right. It was a really uncertain time for a lot of people.
Exactly. And there's this feeling of unease, you know? Like things aren't right. And that really sets the stage for Trump's comeback.
So you're saying there was already this underlying frustration that he was able to tap into?
Absolutely. And don't forget, Trump never really went away. Even after he left office in 2021, he was still a huge presence. Criticizing the Biden administration, always in the news, he was basically positioning himself as the only alternative.
Like he was just waiting for his chance to jump back in.
Exactly. And when the 2024 Republican primaries came around, he was more than ready to fight.
And he had some pretty tough competition this time around, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. He had some big names challenging him within his own party, people like Ron DeSantis and Nikki Haley. They each had their own ideas for where the Republican Party should go. But Trump had two things going for him. His fundraising was insane, and his base was rock solid.
It's pretty amazing how he kept that support, even after everything that happened in his first term.
Yeah, it really is. He had this connection with them, you know. He understood their worries and anxieties, especially when it came to the economy. While other candidates were trying to appeal to everyone, Trump went all in on populism.
What do you mean?
Well, for example, he kept talking about bringing back manufacturing jobs, especially in those states that had lost tons of factories.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was a message that hit home for people who felt like they'd been left behind by the system, and it worked.
So despite all the challenges, he managed to win the Republican nomination again, but then he had to face the Democrats. What was his strategy in the general election?
Well, he kind of had to walk a tightrope, you know? He had to keep his base energized. But he also needed to win over those moderate and independent voters.
Yeah, that sounds pretty tricky. How did he do it?
He tried to tone things down a little bit, you know,
Right.
not be quite as aggressive as he was before. He talked about his economic record before the pandemic, things like low unemployment and GDP growth. It was like a make America great again message.
Right.
And he really focused on issues like public safety, immigration, and crime, things that people were really worried about.
So kind of playing on nostalgia and addressing people's current fears? Did it work?
Well, his economic message definitely resonated with people who were struggling, you know, with inflation and everything. Exit polls show that he actually won back a lot of working class voters in places like Pennsylvania and Michigan.
Wow, so he got back some of the people who had voted against him before.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm guessing there were still some obstacles in his way?
Yeah, definitely. His style was still a problem for a lot of voters, especially in the suburbs. They wanted someone less, you know, confrontational. And the debates with Biden were super tense, which didn't help.
Those debates were brutal.
They were. And all those fiery exchanges, the off-the-cuff remarks, they just created more criticism from the media and political analysts. Some people saw him as a danger to the country, while others saw him as someone who wasn't afraid to speak his mind.
It was really like two completely different perspectives.
Exactly. And let's not forget about the constant tension between Trump and the mainstream media.
Yeah, that was a whole other thing.
It played a huge role in the campaign. He basically bypassed traditional media outlets and focused on places like Truth Social to communicate directly with his supporters.
That way he could control the message.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the mainstream media kept focusing on controversies from his past and new allegations that popped up. It was a constant back and forth.
It felt like the country was having two totally separate conversations.
That's a great way to put it. The media landscape, with its echo chambers and all the partisan biases, just made the divisions in the country even worse.
It was a mess.
Yeah.
One thing I remember vividly from the campaign was Trump's rallies. Those were huge.
Oh, yeah, they were massive. They were a key part of his strategy to energize his base, especially in those battleground states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Arizona.
Right, those states were really important for him.
Absolutely. They were part of what people called the Red Wall, traditionally Democratic states that Trump flipped in 2016. He needed to win them again. And the rallies were like giant pep rallies, lots of patriotic symbols, people chanting USA, USA, and a lot of attacks against the Biden administration.
So he was really reminding his supporters why they liked him in the first place.
Right.
But what were the Democrats doing to counter all of this?
They tried to paint Trump as a threat to democracy. They emphasized the need for stability, unity, a return to normalcy after the craziness of his first term.
Kind of like a calming presence, the opposite of Trump.
Right. And that message worked with some voters, especially in the suburbs. They were looking for a leader who wouldn't be so divisive.
So it sounds like it was a really close race. Both sides fighting hard for every single vote.
It was incredibly close. Both sides did everything they could to get people to the polls. The Democrats focused on urban areas and young voters, while the Republicans targeted rural voters and people who felt left behind by the economy. And the turnout was historic. It was clear that this election was about way more than just policies. It was about two fundamentally different visions for America.
And then there was the whole issue of election integrity, which became a huge flashpoint.
Right. Trump started raising concerns about mail-in ballots and voter fraud, just like he did in 2020. He focused on states like Pennsylvania and Georgia where mail-in voting had increased a lot.
It was a really contentious issue.
Yeah. And these claims, amplified by his supporters and right-wing media, created this distrust in the whole electoral process. And it led to a bunch of legal challenges.
So after all of that, the rallies, the debates, the court battles, Trump ends up winning a second term. It's crazy. What does it tell us about America in 2024?
It shows how divided the country was, almost perfectly split between people who saw Trump as a savior and those who saw him as a threat. It was a division that went way deeper than politics. It was about culture, identity, values, the whole thing.
So we left off talking about how divided the country was when Trump won a second term. What happened when he got back in the White House? Did he try to bring people together or just keep doing things his way?
Well, you got to remember all those promises he made during the campaign. His supporters were expecting him to deliver, and fast. They wanted him to be tough on immigration, bring back American jobs, and drain the swamp in Washington. You know, all those things he talked about.
Yeah, it seemed like he had a pretty ambitious agenda, especially with the Democrats still in control of the Senate. How do you deal with that?
He didn't waste any time, that's for sure. One of the first things he did was crack down on immigration. He tightened up border security, increased deportations, made it harder for people to get asylum in the U.S.
That was a big win for his base, right?
Oh, yeah, they loved it.
Yeah.
But it also caused a ton of pushback from Democrats and advocacy groups. They called it inhumane and cruel. It was super controversial.
So right off the bat, we see that same confrontational style, that back and forth between the two sides.
Exactly. And it didn't stop there. Remember how he talked about bringing back American jobs? He really doubled down on domestic manufacturing and energy production.
How did he do that?
Well, he put tariffs on goods coming from China, renegotiated trade deals like NAFTA. He said he was doing it to get better deals for American workers. And he rolled back a bunch of environmental regulations to help industries like coal and oil.
So he was really trying to shake things up. But did those policies actually work?
It's hard to say for sure. It's kind of a mixed bag. Some people say they created jobs, especially in manufacturing. He would always point to specific companies that opened factories or expanded their operations in the U.S. Like, see, it's working. But critics argued that those gains were offset by job losses in other areas, like renewable energy. And they said the tariffs just ended up raising prices for consumers.
So some wins, some losses. It sounds like his economic policies were just as controversial as his immigration policies. What about his promise to drain the swamp? Did he manage to change things in Washington?
He definitely tried. He kept going after what he called the deep state and the fake news media. He appointed people who were loyal to him to important positions in his administration, and he often clashed with career government officials, accused them of being disloyal or trying to block his agenda.
And that created some chaos.
Oh, yeah, for sure. There was a ton of turnover in his administration, lots of high-profile resignations and firings. Critics said that all the instability and lack of experience made it hard for the government to actually function.
Sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It wasn't easy, that's for sure. So on the domestic front, we see a lot of the same themes from his first term. Big, bold moves, mixed results, and tons of controversy. But what about his foreign policy? Did he change his America First approach at all? Not really. He was still skeptical of international organizations and agreements. He kept criticizing NATO allies for not spending enough on defense. And he even threatened to pull the U.S. out of NATO altogether.
That must have made some European leaders nervous.
Yeah, they weren't happy about it. They saw NATO as super important for protecting Europe from Russia. So those relationships remained pretty tense. What about other countries? How did they react to Trump being back in charge? It was a mixed bag, as you might expect. Some countries, like Israel and Saudi Arabia, were happy to see him back. They saw him as a strong ally who shared their interests. But other countries, especially in Europe and Asia, were more cautious. They remembered how unpredictable he could be, and they were worried about his America First agenda.
So his second term was kind of marked by a lot of the same things as his first. Controversial policies, strained relationships, and just constant drama. Did any of that change as his presidency went on?
Well, in some ways, things actually got even more intense.
So we left off talking about how Trump's second term seemed to just ramp up the drama and division from his first term. Did things ever calm down?
It's funny you say that because in a lot of ways, the intensity actually increased. Like, everyone was watching his every move,
Oh, yeah. The media, the Democrats, even some Republicans who weren't on board with him, they were all waiting for him to mess up.
Right. And the investigations into his business dealings and what happened during his first term, those were still going on. And then new allegations started coming out. It felt like there was always something going on.
It sounds exhausting, honestly. Like the country was always on edge.
Yeah, it was a wild time. And it seemed like it really got to Trump himself. He kind of withdrew, started relying on a smaller group of advisors, and his rhetoric became even more combative. It was like the pressure just kept building.
And the country was still so divided. Did he ever try to, bring people together at all?
That's one of the most interesting things about his second term. He didn't really try to reach out to the people who disagreed with him. He kept holding those huge rallies, which his base loved, but they just pushed his critics further away. His language became even more divisive, and he started talking about politics as this battle between good and evil.
So instead of trying to unify the country, he just kept doing what had worked for him before, even though it was obviously alienating a lot of people.
Exactly. And I think that's a really important takeaway from his second term. It showed the limits of his populist approach. He was great at getting his supporters fired up and tapping into their frustrations. But he couldn't build a wider coalition or govern in a way that addressed everyone's concerns.
So what does that mean for us? What's the legacy of Trump's 2024 victory?
It's still unfolding, really. But one thing's for sure, it showed how fragile our political system is. It exposed how divided American society is and how hard it is to govern when everyone's at each other's throats. It also made people question the role of the media, social media, technology, all of that stuff in shaping our political conversations.
Wow, that's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Like we need a whole new deep dive just to figure out the implications of his second term.
I think you're right. But for now, I think the main thing to remember is this. Trump's 2024 win wasn't just about him or one election. It was a symptom of much bigger issues that we're still dealing with as a country.
So what does all of this mean for the future?
That's the big question, isn't it? We're still living with the consequences of his presidency, but understanding how he won, not just once, but twice, is really important if we want to understand American politics today and where we might be headed.
Well said. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Trump's 2024 victory, we're left with more questions than answers. But I guess that's how history works, right? It's messy, it's complicated, and it's always changing.
And that's exactly why we need to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep talking about these things. The more we understand about our past, the better prepared we'll be to deal with the present and the future.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Thanks to everyone for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Today is your lucky day. Today is the day that our $3 website works for you, paying you directly to your PayPal daily. Imagine $3 ongoing continuous payments to your PayPal account. Imagine falling asleep and waking up to $300 in your PayPal account. How would this make you feel? How could this help you? What bills could you pay? What kind of fun could you have? What does that retirement look like now? All for a one-time payment of $3. This website is DFY done for you, fully built and completely hosted, and never stops collecting payments for you. You have spent $3 on coffee on a regular, but that coffee won't help you create multiple streams of income. Click the link below.